Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is John Van Lunen, and you are listening to Treasures of the Outer Banks, the podcast that celebrates the people and places that make this beach special. This is episode 040 with Hannah Bunn-West, the author of the book Remarkable Women of the Outer Banks. Hannah was raised on the Outer Banks and still calls it home to this day. Hannah has curated a list of amazing women who possess traits of toughness and persistence. Some of their stories are historical, while others are highly meaningful. Either way, they endured and made a difference. Let's get started. Though some of their stories were hard to uncover, and though their backgrounds are diverse, each of these women swam against the tide in her day and age. It is said that well-behaved women seldom make history. This depends, however, on how you define misbehavior. If it means charting your own course, taking a stand, or speaking out to affect change, the women in these pages misbehaved indeed. The aim of this book, then, is to highlight them in our remarkable history. And that is a quote directly from the introduction of Remarkable Women of the Outer Banks by Hannah Bunn-West. And Hannah is here today with me. Thanks for meeting me, Hannah.
Thank you so much. I'm excited.
Excellent. And how did you come up with this list?
How did I come up with this list? And I think I talk about it in my introduction too. I've always loved history, and our local history is so fascinating. And working at the First Colony Inn, which is I think the last historic hotel we have out here on the Outer Banks, it was a really inspiring place. And then I would drive home and I would pass Jockey's Ridge, and Carol Estebaum her story was somewhat well known. I wanted to do a deep dive of it in my book, but I think of her, and then I think of just all these different landmarks and different parts of our history, and I kept kind of uncovering these little breadcrumbs of women that were linked to these things that we might have heard of the event or the landmark, but never the woman tied to it and her contributions to it. So I didn't really have a clear list when I proposed this book to my publisher. It just kind of fell into place. That
was a pretty gutsy move by the publisher.
Yeah. They needed a. I say brief. It was 17 pages, but book proposal.
Okay.
But it had to kind of have an outline for an idea. It definitely wasn't in any means a finished product, which is interesting with nonfiction because you don't have to have a finished book manuscript at the time of your contract.
Yeah.
So it
because
works a
it can be ongoing. The research can be ongoing.
Yeah, exactly. And so even some of them I was, already working on the book. For example, Chrissy Bowser. I had taken my kids to Island Farm over in Manio, and had never heard of Chrissy Bowser, but the woman that was doing the historical interpretation in the cookhouse there told my kids and myself about her, and I was like, okay, that's a chapter there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And let's see, you obviously did a lot of research. So I'd like to go down the list of the women that you had in the book, and maybe, we can just come up with a few things and talk about each woman. You start off with Eleanor Dare, the first British woman in the Americas, I guess, or on the Eastern Seaboard, and she gave birth to the first British child in America. And, is there anything that you found that revealing about her personality in your research?
That kind of became the point of her chapter, I think. She is famously known for being the mother of the first English child born in the New World, quote unquote. Her child being Virginia Dare. And so we know her name, she's got this fame and this notoriety, but we know so little, virtually nothing about her as a person or as a woman.
Right.
So that kind of became the point, and I kind of tried to speculate, I guess, what that experience might have been like for her, paint a picture exactly. I think, I was pregnant with my second child while I was writing this book, and I'm just thinking,
can you imagine?
No. You're 8 months pregnant, you've just crossed the ocean on a wooden boat.
How crazy is that?
It's July, you have your baby in this brand new wild place in August,
minimal resources, and the natives may or may not have been hostile.
Yeah. And at this point, unfortunately, it was a very hostile environment because of the previous colonies' antics, we'll say.
Right.
So she was, hostile territory, had no resources, and the experience of becoming a new mother.
Right. I think there's just obviously her toughness and endurance. And a lot of these women, show some kind of, they definitely show some toughness.
Oh yeah, a lot of grit.
and many of them show some endurance because she was out there.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we don't get any of her own voice really. So we have journals and diaries by her father, John White.
Right.
Ralph Lane kept a detailed account. Thomas Harriot kept accounts of these expeditions, but we have nothing from her or from any of the other women on the voyage.
Right.
I guess if anything, if you've heard of the Dare Stone, it was they haven't proven it to be a hoax or to be historically, not a hoax. But if there was one place where we get something in her voice or written in the historical records, that would be it. But
right. And so I just had an opportunity to listen to Scott Dawson talk, and I just got his book and started his book, and he is literally uncovering history down on Hatteras Island of what may be remnants of that colony that may or may not have moved from Roanoke Island to Hatteras Island. The English being down on Hatteras Island, boy, wouldn't it be great to just find some DNA that somehow tied those people all together? But I know that's never going to happen because so many people have been removed from this area. But yeah, it's a great story. Let's move on to Chrissy Bowser. Yeah. She, an African-American woman who lived on Roanoke Island. Somehow, somewhere, she got her freedom, right? But it's vague. It's very vague.
It's really vague. This is probably the chapter that I had to really dig and just pour through census records and any other kind of record I could, specifically because any person that was enslaved would not have been in the records by name.
Right.
They were counted among property. They were numbered male and female, but no names.
Right.
And yeah, there's still differing opinions on whether she was enslaved and gained her freedom or whether she was born free, because there was a free black population on Roanoke Island, and a lot of them were Bowsers, the last name Bowser. Actually, the majority of the free, how it's listed on the census is, quote, free colored. So that group of people, most of them had the last name Bowser. Right. But Chrissy did not appear on that list until she didn't appear on any census records until after 1867, which would have been the first one post-Civil War.
Civil War, yeah.
So it's like kind of a big question mark sort of hanging over.
And so she cooked for a local family, probably did some other work as well. And you paint a picture that she was good at storytelling, and she seemed to have a very pleasant nature to herself. How did you get that from your research?
Yeah, from my research. So again, with Island Farm over on Manio, it's a kind of historical reenactment, I guess, or a living history site of the Etheridge family farm and homestead, dating to about the 1840s. So that is where I first learned about Chrissy Bowser, and that's where she worked for that family. The family did have, I think it was 5 or 6 enslaved people. I believe, because I went there recently, that they interpret her as being one of those enslaved people. But then you get other people saying that she was not enslaved. Right. But there was some historical records and accounts of the Etheridge family kind of recalling memories of her, and they referred to her as Aunt Chrissy or Aunt Chrissy, and suggesting, that she had this familial tie with the family. But then to sort of present the other side of the coin, there's also memories written down of her sitting in front of her quarters or her house, and kind of having her leg across the door, very much like, stay out, this is my space. So, right. And we don't get any of her voice or her stories or her records. So I wouldn't want to assume how she actually felt, but I think the people in her life, thought fondly of her. Right.
Mm-hmm. And I've done a little bit of research on some of the people that were free, non-free slaves, and the one little theory that I have is that they didn't have the mobility to move. Even once after Civil War was over, they didn't have the ability to just go get a job and cash in all their chips and go find some great place to live. Right. They just didn't have that ability. So she was probably kind of stuck here on purpose, or maybe not on purpose, but she was stuck here, and she probably did what she worked where she could work, So not totally surprising. And a quote from late in that chapter on Miss Chrissy, Aunt Chrissy, is, on the day of her death in early March, she was laid out in one of the Etheridge's storehouses, where family and friends could pay their last respects, then buried under the ancient tree still known to this day as the Chrissy Oak. And that's kind of interesting to me. I'm thinking a storehouse was kind of like a barn. So if she was really respected, wouldn't, if they really wanted to put on a show for her, wouldn't they put her in the parlor, the main parlor of the house? Or, could have been maybe they just couldn't put that many people in the house, so the storehouse was just more accommodating. I don't know. Again, I'm speculating. Yeah. But in one regard, they were showing her the respect that she deserved, but maybe not 100% because she was African American, which was kind of typical at that time. Because
there were, in my research, that there was a parlor or a part of the house where they would lay out family members that had died, for visitation. So yeah, that's an interesting kind of line to draw or look at. And it may have been societal, or it may have been, there's all sorts of lines that we try to interpret today and to the best that we can. But yeah, I think with a lot of this, I certainly didn't want to put words in anyone's mouth retroactively. So I kind of, with the book, just tried
I'll speculate.
Yeah. I tried to present it as objectively as I can. But to your point about, because they do say, she was enslaved, but even after the Civil War, she chose to stay here. But how much freedom as a woman in the 1860s do you have? I mean, women didn't even have much freedom to start their own life up until fairly recent history, so her options may have been limited in that regard.
So the title of the book is Remarkable Women. What do you think, to you, what makes Chrissy Bowser remarkable?
I think what makes her remarkable is just the odds that she had against her and where she ended up in, from just the scope of her life, from starting out possibly as an enslaved person to the end of her life. She's a property owner. She's independent. She lives alone. She subsists on her own, essentially, in such a unique part of the world, in such a unique, tight-knit community that has its share of problems, on the global scale with a war going on. But, just the life she was able to make for herself is remarkable.
Right. You're bringing up a good point. She fought against some tough odds there, no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. Irene Tate, this story... I'd never really heard of this story, so this was the one story where I knew nothing about, and it's pretty fascinating. Yeah. Let's see. She knew, I guess as a 3-year-old or something like that, she met the Wright brothers who stayed at her house.
Yeah.
And talk about life coming full circle. Yes. She becomes a pilot, and at one point she had a world record, or she set the world record for female unmanned flight, or a female manned flight. From, what was it, New York to
Miami. First round trip. First to make a round trip from.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to find in my notes and I can't see it, but yeah. So this story is pretty remarkable, and now we're starting to get into more recorded history where the other ones were a lot tougher to research. There was some stories behind Irene Tate. Irene Tate was extremely progressive for her time, being a woman flying and all that stuff. What do you think made her so independent?
I have to attribute some of her independence to probably just growing up in Kitty Hawk at the time. Right. I mean, I love finding all the old historical photos, and the photos of Kitty Hawk around 1900, 1903, when the Wright brothers were out here. It's just sand. It's just sand hills and some scrub oaks, and it's really blurry, but there's a picture of what Kitty Hawk Village at that time looked like, and it's just a few little buildings and houses, and I think just she was educated. She had gone to school and even college and everything like that, but this was her home for most of her life, and I think that kind of shaped her.
Right. And how crazy must it have been for a kid growing up in the early 1900s? I mean, scratching out an existence on the Outer Banks, and then going up to Norfolk to go to college. I mean, talk about, little pig in the city. Yeah. Jeez, and Norfolk's not even. I guess Norfolk was kind of a teeming with activity because of the port and everything like that. But man, that must have been crazy.
Yeah.
Let's see, just to show you, give you an example. Another quote from her chapter. She logged over 50,000 miles in the air and became the first woman to fly a round trip between New York and Miami. And that must have been, geez, when do you think that was? 1920s?
I would say so. I think her first trip up in a plane was 1918, if I'm quoting my own research right.
Yeah, I think I see that.
Which I thought was interesting because that even predated Amelia Earhart. They were actually born in the same year.
Right, isn't that crazy?
So they were both kind of these like pioneers in flight for women.
Yeah, and Amelia Earhart's more famous now.
Yeah,
which is kind of funny because their trajectory was...
It was really similar.
Very similar.
And their ties to the Wright brothers. You know, Amelia Earhart was out here for the dedication of the monument and the first flight boulder and some really cool old photos of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And she relocates to New Jersey with her husband. They do... I don't know if it was considered barnstorming, but they did some... still stayed very present in the flying industry. And yet she was still very resourceful building a new house up in New Jersey, much like the people on the Outer Banks would be resourceful in taking scrap lumber and wood and projects and just putting it in their house.
She actually salvaged parts of shipwreck even up there and incorporated it into their home up there. And her story to me is just... I had never heard of it, first of all. I'd heard of the Tate family, and there's Tate family still has deep roots out here now. But I'd never heard of her specifically, and her story is so interesting.
Right. And did you meet her descendants at all?
I did not. I know that Suzanne Tate, the author, is a well-known Tate around here, and I'm curious to see how their family line.
Okay.
I didn't meet them in person, but I was able to find her granddaughters. 3 of Irene Tate's granddaughters, and they are now living in all different parts of the country. But one of them, so generously, Tammy, shared all the photos that are in Irene Tate, or most of the photos in her chapter. She literally dug them out of storage in her house and scanned them and shared them with me. So that was really special.
That is nice. Mm-hmm. So moving on to the next lady, Nellie Myrtle Pridgeon. And I seem to vaguely recall either when she died, because it was kind of became big news. Here's this obscure little lady just beachcombing on the Outer Banks every day. But when she died, boy, she left quite an impression on quite a few people. Yeah. I'm trying to remember when she died. Do you remember off the top of your head?
I want to say it was in the 90s, and I know that she passed away in the summer in the height of tourist season, and her family and everyone who knew and loved her knew to not hold her service until the tourists were gone, and so they waited until the fall, until the hot season.
And in your opinion, what makes Nellie Myrtle Pridgeon remarkable?
So Nellie Myrtle's reputation precedes her, and a lot of people have a lot of things to say about her. And I think what makes her remarkable, though, is that she was not concerned with being liked or likable. She was such a just staunch believer in what she believed in and preserving this area and this place. And I think a lot of women are really concerned with being likable, and she was not concerned with that at all.
Right.
That's remarkable to me.
Yeah, and now we're starting to see the preservationists. She might have been, she was probably the most popular first preservationist of somebody that just wanted to preserve the Outer Banks for what it was, the nature. She was obviously close to nature every day. She was on the beach every single day, just collecting stuff. And I thought I heard a rumor they were going to try to make that house or building a museum or some kind of historical place.
There's been a long, drawn-out sort of up and down battle with that.
Yeah. It's, by the way, for the listeners, it's still standing on the beach road, just south of the Kitty Hawk Kites mothership.
Yep. And I was fortunate to be able to go in and have a look around, because for several years it was operating as the Outer Banks Beachcomber Museum. It's not anymore.
Gotcha.
But being able to go in there and be amongst her collection was cool. Amazing.
Yeah.
And just built in Outer Banks history, not necessarily her collection, but there's an old phone booth in there where at the time it was one of 2 on the whole island, from what I understand, from what I remember.
Hilarious.
There's a dining table that came off the wreck of the Huron. Like, there's just, if you're a history lover, that place, like, it gives me chills just thinking about it. And
I think, just a few years ago, they would still open it up once a year and let people walk through. Somehow I always miss it, but I'd love to go check it out. That'd be on my bucket list. All right, let's bump down to Carolista. Did I say that? Carolista? Carolista Baum. And she helped save Jockey's Ridge. And again, so here's the preservationist coming out. And I tell you, I admire the Outer Bankers for just seeing the importance of saving some of our natural resources. That's not my stomach. That's a cat. Cat's as big as a dog.
He's big. He's diabetic. So
Somebody feed that cat. So, I admire the Outer Bankers, the people that had the vision in the beginning to see what natural resources had to be saved, and Jockey's Ridge was one of them. It was somebody was ready to develop it, and she stepped up, and she was just a normal person. She wasn't a politician. She was just a local small-time business owner. Do you know? So we're probably getting a little closer to Descendants and stuff. Do you know how she felt about her notoriety?
That's something I would like to know. From everything I've watched and read, she definitely had a level of humility with the work she was doing, and she was, trying to kind of share the praise with all the people in the community that helped her. So yeah, I don't know. I would have been a young kid at the time, but I have been lucky enough to meet her family and work with Ann Cabell on this book and interview her, and I was able to go to the dedication ceremony for her new highway marker over there at Jockey's Ridge, and her family was there, her children. So I don't know specifically, but I guess the only kind of clues I can take is everyone who knew her and remembers her, and a lot of people here on the Outer Banks, a lot of locals still remember her. Just overwhelmingly, everyone has these really fond memories, and they're just kind of always talking about her personality and her smile and her generous spirit.
Right.
So based on the information I do have coming from other people. Yeah.
And I kind of get that vibe from your book, and I don't have any reason to think anything else. But obviously there was a tough part of her as well.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of business people, they have, the people skills to interact with customers, but at the end of the day, they got to watch out for the bottom line. And her bottom line was, don't develop that sand.
Yeah, I kind of think of her as the epitome of the Southern woman who's going to smile at you and speak sweetly to you, but will get what she wants in the end.
That's a good one. Yeah. And in one sentence kind of sums it all up. Well, not sums it up. I'm sorry, but one sentence I want to pull out just to show you how important this landmark is. Today, Jockey's Ridge is the most visited state park in North Carolina. More than that, it's the legacy of Careless the Bomb left for all the people. The most visited state park. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
When you think about, I hear about the Smokies. I don't tour the Smokies, but geez, all I hear about is people visiting the Smoky Mountains and that type of thing. And then you got Raleigh and Wilmington and everything else. But geez, that's an amazing stat right there.
Yeah. And
she saved it for all of us, which is cool. And I can vouch. I've raised 3 kids on the Outer Banks, and when we were bored, get in the car. We're going to Jockey's Ridge. We're going to hike to the top and roll down to the bottom.
Yeah, a wild place, and we need more of those out here. So I think that kind of thread of preservation that runs through the book, that theme kept recurring almost throughout all the chapters. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. And going back to the early part of Chapter 5 on Careless to Bound, the kids were out playing, and they hear a bulldozer revving up and getting ready to start plowing the dune a little bit, and one of the oldest kids ran back to the one person who they knew could right the wrong, their mother.
That's right.
And that's funny. They must have known their mom was strong enough to tackle that project. That's great.
I think all kids kind of think of their mom in that regard, but I think
right.
They knew especially that she had some extra skills in that area.
Right. Fix it. Well, congrats to her, and I'm so happy she's got that marker on her on the highway down by Jockey's Ridge. Fast forwarding to Cheryl Shelton Roberts, which I was actually here. I moved here right before they moved the Hatteras Lighthouse, and so I remember hearing some of the chatter of what was going on, but I didn't know that this woman was such an instrumental part in moving it forward.
Right.
And let's see, she writes something, I guess, in her book, right? In a quote from your book, which is a quote from her book, Hatteras sits on the edge of the continent, marking the line between sand and water, safety and danger. This light station site has witnessed all that has come to pass since the birth of this nation until the present. Its history is our history. Cheryl Shelton Roberts in Cape Hatteras, America's Lighthouse. So right there, she just says how important this is. And as you describe in this chapter, and what a lot of people may not know is that there were a lot of locals who were perfectly content with watching this thing crumble into the ocean.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. Wow.
Yeah.
So my question is, boy, she had such strong conviction. What do you think about the backlash she received from those people that were Debbie Downers?
Yeah, I think that I think the backlash was unwarranted, but I also think she understood the backlash. I think she really had a deep connection with the people, a lot of them being descendants of keeper families. A lot of the people down on Hatteras Island kind of in the camp of, we're not moving this thing because it is sort of like the true north in our lives. It's always been there. Our families have grown up around it for generations. And I think the letting it fall into the ocean part kind of came after all these attempts to, well, we can save it and we can keep it where it is and we're going to protect it. And that sort of increasingly became impossible. And so then after that, it was, okay, well, we're not moving it. It can fall in where it is. But I think that she did have a deep understanding of their sentiment and their history and their ties to it. So she was getting, like I said, I don't think any of the backlash she was personally getting was warranted. She got some threatening letters, and she sort of eventually was sort of intimidated enough to sort of even relocate out of the area.
Right.
So obviously a big disruption in her life, but she really understood the complexity of the whole situation. And, of course, in the end, she was instrumental in having it successfully moved, and we still have it to appreciate today. So.
Yeah, I remember the move. It looks great. I was in it. I did climb it before it was moved, and I saw how close that ocean was. And I've been to it afterwards, and they've done a beautiful job. And I'll say, I think people were just a little too cynical, because if you owned a construction company and said, yes, we can move it, do you want to be the schmuck that drops it?
Oh my God.
So
right.
I felt pretty good. If they say they can move it, and I think they had moved something else before, I believe them, And sure enough, they got it done, and it was actually quite a spectacle. I remember that summer was a big deal. How far it moved every day.
It was an incredible.
Do you remember it at all?
Yeah, so I would have been a kid at the time, so I remember, hey kids, they're moving the lighthouse, this is amazing. But I didn't remember any of, I wasn't in the adult world at that time. I did not remember any conflict,
the politics of it all,
politics surrounding it. So only now in researching for this chapter did I really learn how political it was.
I do recall, and again, I just moved here, and I had heard some people didn't want it moved, and they were worried that it would. They're worried it was going to fall down during the move.
Because it seemed impossible to move this thing. 200 feet tall.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's all I remember, though. And I kind of thought that was a little hokey thinking back then. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad they moved it. It looks great, and it's still a wonderful attraction. I know it's going through some renovations right now.
And it's also highly visited, I think, on the scale of
way up there?
national parks. Yeah, it's pretty up there, too,
I believe
for our little area. Yeah.
I believe it. Okay, moving forward to Virginia Tillett. And Virginia Tillett just passed away a couple years ago.
She did, yes.
And she was an African-American who was pretty much born and raised on Roanoke Island. And I tell you, she, like a lot of these women, is just a game of endurance where she just kept pushing forward. She literally started from the ground up. I think she started as a teacher's aide, which I've been a teacher's aide. It's pretty much on the bottom of the ladder right there. And then she just kept moving up to do some really great stuff. Do you want to talk about some of the stuff she's done in the education world?
Yeah, sure. She had a long career and a really notable career. She was on the Board of Commissioners. She was on the Board of Education, involved with the Board of Elections. So she was an elected official in our county for years and years and years. And like you said, she did start sort of from the bottom up, I think, starting like many of us do on the Outer Banks in hospitality and restaurant work, moving up to teaching. She was at Head Start, which, has had so many children kind of come up through there and be raised, and giving them a good start. And then moving into, these more sort of like political or activism roles in the capacity of being an elected official. She was with the library for years, and she actually drove the bookmobile, so people remember her fondly as the bookmobile lady. So just like her touch has kind of been on so many aspects of life in Dare County, from education to voting to governing. So really kind of helped shape the area.
Excellent. And she started to become very active promoting the Freedmen's Colony. And for the listeners, after the Civil War, or when the Union took over Roanoke Island, they quickly made a colony for African Americans to escape, settle, become free, and they called it the Freedmen's Colony. And it's kind of a sad story because they gave it to the African Americans. Then a few years later, they pretty much just took it away and gave the property back to its original owners, the farmers and stuff on Roanoke Island. But even worse than that is the history has almost been erased, and there's almost no records kept of who was there and exactly what happened. I mean, there's a few records, but so apparently Virginia Tillett was working pretty feverishly to promote the Freedmen's Colony and make it more of a landmark that people could visit and experience. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of in the later part of her life, a lot of her effort and enthusiasm went toward sharing the story of the Freedmen's Colony with locals, but also she was kind of pushing to get that into the curriculum in North Carolina and North Carolina history so that people would learn about it, because I grew up in Dare County and went, daycare through high school, every year of school in this county, and I never learned about the Freedmen's Colony until I was an adult. And
I was going to ask you that question. You grew up on the Outer Banks, and you don't know it. You know anything about it until
did not learn
recently.
about it, and it's not that I wasn't paying attention in school. I was a school.
You're a pretty good student. Okay,
I'll admit it. So we learned so much about the Lost Colony, but then we have this other colony that in much more recent history, and I had never heard anything about it, and it's such an impactful thing to learn about because so many of the descendants of the Freedmen's Colony members still live on Roanoke Island today. So they have this, and Virginia Tillett herself included. So it's like, to not even have that tie to your own history in any sort of official capacity, or, it's something you might learn about in school.
Right. It's kind of heartbreaking. And you kind of, I think you allude to something earlier in your book here. Here it is. This is in the introduction. Any existing historical records outside of physical artifacts that have been uncovered were written by European men and presented within the context of their outsiders' understanding. Now, right there, you're talking more about the colony on Roanoke Island, the Lost Colony on Roanoke Island.
1587 colony, yeah.
But that same philosophy, that same mindset, could be attributed to the state of affairs during Freedmen's Colony, which is, the white people didn't want to be seen as this cold, callous group of people. So, let's just erase this chapter. This is just me thinking. This is just my own op-ed right now, is that let's just erase this little chapter so we don't have to reflect on how poorly we treated these people. We gave them land and then we took it away. So let's just, everybody forget about it.
It is so interesting, because the colony itself, like you said, was established by the government, by the Union government. And then it was also essentially dismantled by the same government.
Right.
And then, with the agreement that we're going to give the white landowners their land back, which, they had land. It was occupied by a government project, basically.
Right.
So you can kind of see it from their perspective. But then for these people that had been promised a home and freedom to essentially they really encouraged them and almost forced them to go back to the mainland.
Right.
There was, at the height of the colony, there was over 3,000 formerly enslaved people living there. Prior to the war, there was maybe like 500 people living on Roanoke Island.
Yeah.
So, but to me, the part of the story that I kind of get stuck on when we're talking about fairness is that the freedmen had built homes and from just materials that they found, and they had been told that they could, we have to leave this land, but we can at least take these homes with us. And then a couple references I found, I read that they actually burned the homes that they had been promised that they could take with them. So try to look at this objectively, but there was a lot of injustices, I think, that. But the happy ending to the story is that 11 members of the Freedmen's Colony, 11 families, were able to purchase a plot of land.
Right. Some people were industrious enough.
Yeah,
to...
it's the California neighborhood in Roanoke Island, and a lot of the descendants of the colonists still live there today.
Wow.
So I think that's a success story that they.
And did you find were you able to track down any history amongst those people?
No, other than just, it's like, you know how many familiar last names there are on the Outer Banks. To me, that would be like a whole another book that I would love to do, is like find these names of people that still live here and have these big family networks, and kind of find out what they know about their lineage and how it traces back to the Freedmen's Colony, and really start to like put some of those stories and those pieces together. Because in Patricia Click, her book, A Time Full of Trial, is one of the main reference pieces that I used for this, and she did about 20 years of research on this Freedmen's Colony, and she went and talked to families, and a lot of the older people in the families had these like vague memories of the colony or of stories surrounding the colony, but it almost feels like it really did get lost even in people's family stories and histories and memories. So that is a good book idea, and I want to now I've got my wheels turning. Sequel. Yeah, because their families are still here and they're still a really tight-knit community.
The family tree would be just fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which of these women do you relate to the most? Or are there, and there could be certain personalities or certain traits of their personalities of each person that you might relate to.
I would be honored to have any of their personality traits. I feel like and increasingly as I get older, I do have like this really strong passion for preservation. I get so upset when I see a new gas station going up, or when I see another lot being cleared, even if it's just for a house. This is such a special area, a unique area, really, in all the world. So I think a lot of the women, maybe like Carol Lister or Nellie Myrtle, that have that really strong passion for preservation, I can relate to them pretty closely. Yeah.
Excellent. And I can cut this out, but Diane Baum St. Clair, did that name come up at all?
I have had so many people after this book came out suggest...
Sorry to bring up a sore subject.
No, that's not a sore subject at all. I've had so many people say you need to do volume 2 because there's like all these other women that like you have to include her.
Right.
And she did come up, and I also read I can't remember what publication it was in now, but I read a good article on her.
I think I may have seen it too. It wasn't a huge article, but it was
great.
It was pretty well encompassing. You're thinking, whoa, this lady was amazing.
Yeah.
And she owned all that property, and she was generous enough to pretty much give it to the town of Kill Devil Hills for the schools and the rec center and whatever else. I can't remember, but it was pretty generous. Pretty big move for her. And she was a successful businesswoman, I believe.
And I've come across, just by meeting people or by being told about other women, a lot of women who like I said, their accomplishments, but you would never tie their name to it. And I think they wanted it that way in some regards.
Is that right?
Yeah.
They wanted to be...
I think I met someone, she's actually working on an Outer Banks documentary project with PBS North Carolina, and her grandmother was really instrumental, I think, in like Elizabethan Gardens and a lot of other sort of local organizations, and I had never heard her name, and I don't think a lot of other people did, so kind of wanting to be under the radar sort of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Any other projects or sequels you want to talk about?
I am so excited because of this book. I've had the opportunity to work on a children's book, or a book geared toward upper elementary level readers.
Nice.
And that's a project I'm working on with the state. And I can't... Wow. I don't know that I've been given the total go-ahead to like fully talk about the project because it's not out yet. But I'm really excited about that. I love working with children, and writing for children has always been a dream. So I'm really excited that this has opened that door.
All right. I'll be looking forward to it. Yeah. The name of the book is Remarkable Women of the Outer Banks. This is Hannah Bunn-West, and you can always pick one of these books up at one of our great local bookstores we have on the Outer Banks. You can also get it on Amazon if you're not near the Outer Banks, and feel free to get it from there. Any other channels or avenues? Or
I have a website. It's hannahwestwrites.com.
Excellent.
It's fairly simple, but there are links to a lot of our different local bookstores you can order from, even if you're not here, and a few other kind of ways and websites that you can order the book.
Awesome. Hannah, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much.
I'm extremely thankful for Hannah Bunn-West sitting down with me today. The stories she shares in her book are both amazing and important. I really hope she writes another volume because there are many more women on this beach who deserve to be recognized. Be sure to pick up a copy of Remarkable Women on the Outer Banks at an Outer Banks bookstore. If you are not on the Outer Banks, many of our local bookstores will ship to you. This way you can still support our local shops. If all else fails, you can always get it on Amazon. Don't forget, be sure to check out my website, treasuresoftheouterbanks.com, and sign up for the weekly email so we can stay in touch. I promise I won't be annoying and you can unjoin at any time. I'd like to bring your attention to a new page on the site where I sell merchandise. It's not too early to start shopping for Christmas. I sell a cool t-shirt with your favorite milepost sign on it that I think a lot of people would enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and until next time, make it a good one.